This episode of our This Week in XR podcast is sponsored by Zapper. Zapper is one of the world's leading XR companies. Over the past 12 years, they've won numerous awards for memorable campaigns. They've democratized AR by making tools and SDKs that anyone can use. And they created ZapBox, the world's most affordable mixed reality headset. Most recently, Zapper worked with Unilever to create an enhanced QR code called Accessible QR, which enables packaged goods to speak to the blind and partially sighted. If you're thinking XR, give the team at Zapper a call or visit zapper.com to see how they can help you on your XR journey.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to This Week in XR. It is Friday, October 13th, and apparently we had some Friday the 13th bugaboos in our world. I'm just admitting your partner, Meron, Darin, into the fore with us here. So we're a little late getting started. So normally, as the listeners know from around the world, which continues to grow, we cover the news with Roni, Charlie, and I before we bring in our guests. But because we got a little bit of a late start because of some tech issues this morning, we're going to do it a little differently. Charlie is off again this week, enjoying his well-deserved vacation. So it's me and Roni driving the show. And we have Meron and Darin from Inner Cosmos today. And Meron I've known for quite some time. Roni is known for quite some time. We've all been in the mixed reality scrum for many, many years. So we'll go a little backwards and talk about your background and then move forward into the current venture that you're working on now and how exciting that is. Obviously, we will not dwell on this today because it is a technology podcast and not a political podcast, but it is important to note and just reflect for a minute that our ties to Israel from everyone on this group are extremely strong. And Israel is a bastion of technology and innovation. And it is very, very stirring and important to us. And we're spending a lot of time on that. So we can take a minute to talk about that if you guys want to reflect on that at all. But from my standpoint, I have tremendous amount of personal friends and work colleagues all over the region. So we're paying close attention to that. But there's plenty of other places to get that news. So we will not dwell on that. But Roni, I know you probably have a moment to want to reflect on that today. It would be insensitive for us not to reflect on that for our listeners.
Yeah, Ted, I think the only message is we just hope that everyone involved, there will be an end to this sort of violence and peace. And there could be so much productivity and wonderful things happening out of that part of the world, which it does a lot. And maybe just a reminder to our audience that I know for myself personally, I know Meron's had that experience. I'm sure, Ted, you have that, we have friends from all sides, right? You could be friends with people from the country you're from or your relatives are from. You could also be friends with Muslims and Palestinians and Arabs and others. So I think it's good to remind everyone, even there was a very horrible war going on, that there are even today way more friendships and good things going on. And we hope that extremism just moves away and we can do productive, great things in the world. So that's my take on it today.
Totally agree. And, for someone that's been there many, many times, the reflection of what's going on the war front is not a true reflection of the humanity that's actually there between multiple cultures and multiple people outside of those little veins of the terrorist cells. And of course, the tremendous toll that they can take in moments like this is terrible. But your point is very well taken, that the real humanity of people connecting to each other of multiple religions, multiple cultures, being there, being in person with that, is very different than this moment in time. So I think that's important to reflect.
I will add one more thing, Ted. Like this whole week, it's just been on a very human level, thinking about the normal jovial discussions we have each week on XR and just the more light and joyful discussions I have throughout the week with all sorts of people. It's been very, very difficult to think about tech, to think about the fun, cool, creative things we get to build when you're just seeing such horrifying things happening. So it's just it's been a very heavy week. So anyone listening, it may not be as light and joyful as it usually is, but hopefully it'll be informative.
Yeah. Meron and Darin, would you like to briefly introduce yourself? And if you want to make a short comment on this. I think it's important and relevant because I know you guys have deep ties to that area as well. But what we will talk about after we talk about the news is your company, Intercosmos, which is a brain-computer interface company, which we have a tremendous amount of fascination and a healthy amount of skepticism about. I will be very candid around. So we want to really dive in, and I think a lot of our listeners will have a good amount of skepticism about this too, which is healthy and important, and a good debate and discussion on that is valuable. But please feel free to start
Sure.
us off with any thoughts that you might have. Then we'll dive into this week's news, and then we'll discuss your company.
Yeah, I'll get started. As Roni mentioned, really, really sad week in the region. I don't want to go too deep into it, except to say that my heart really goes out to the prisoners, their families, and just everyone who, the families of those who passed away last week. It's just a really, and both sides that are trapped in between sort of Hamas's doings.
Yeah.
I don't see this as a Palestinian thing. I see this as a Hamas thing, and it's really sad. And yeah, that's a lot of compassion, a lot of love for everyone there.
We'll be talking about it
That's my
in private settings with friends and family, and your thoughts are absolutely on point. Darin, last word to you, and then we'll dive into something other than that for a few minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to add that this has been a very sad week. I feel badly for people on both sides. A small percentage of the people involved here, Hamas, have caused all of these troubles for Israelis and Palestinians. That is completely unnecessary. And unfortunately, it's going to be messy to clean it up. And I wish both parties on both sides the best going forward, and hope for peace in the near future.
I think we all appreciate that and echo that. And now we're going to sort of kick into our world of this week's innovation news and things that are happening. Some really interesting stuff that's going on. The last word I'll say on that is that the interesting thing about Israeli culture is that strong level of innovation that permeates through so much. If you do a little research into the things that came out of that little stretch of desert over the last 50 years, it has really changed the world of technology. They're probably the most innovative place on the planet and innovative culture on the planet. And I had some of our work colleagues that are in Tel Aviv. We had a big Zoom meeting with them this week, and it was business as usual. They are all about keeping moving on and pressing on, and that was really encouraging. So okay,
Ted, I just have to say something on that. I work with a lot of startups, have my own startups, but I work with a lot of startups around the world. I have a startup friend in Israel. As we're talking, there's basically a rocket raid. He keeps the Zoom going.
Yep.
And is in the bomb shelter without missing a beat, no wavering in his voice, still optimistic.
Yeah.
And is like, it just, I'm like, do you want us to stop? He's like, no, let's keep going. And I spoke to another friend this morning, and he was in a very similar situation, kind of in a bit of a shelter, and just very like, nothing is going to stop moving forward. They're not going to stop life. So
right, we had the exact same experience on our side.
Anyway, back to our show.
Okay, so and Roni, for some reason your video is a little choppy and slow today, but your audio is coming in fine. Most people listen to the podcast for Meron and Darin's perspective, so it's not that big a deal. But your voice is coming in fine, Roni. So not sure why. You're probably just more Friday the 13th drama. At any rate, all right. So welcome back again to This Week in XR. A couple of things on the news front to talk about and go through. The Unity CEO has left the company. John Riccitiello, I'm probably not pronouncing that name exactly right, announced his retirement from this giant multi-billion-dollar gaming company that went IPO about 3 years ago, spiked up really high, has settled down into kind of a trough a little bit. Unity just recently laid off 600 people. As we know, Epic just laid off around 900 people. So that's about 10% of both of those companies' workforces. Recitilio is leaving the board. So that may suggest that it was not his idea to leave, but they attempted a different economic model, which you probably all know about, and caused a big fervor amongst developers. They retreated back from that, but clearly the fallout from that is significant and not particularly happy.
So
right
Ted, a direct comment on that. Like I met some of the founders of Unity early on when I was building Magic Leap. We were partners with Unity when John came on board. I think if you look at what happened, there's a huge importance of like the Unreal Engine and also the Unity engine across developers for XR and mobile and PC all over the world, right? It's used by millions of developers. But I don't think on the engine side, if you take Fortnite away, that ever translated into a real scalable critical mass business, even though it's so important, which is kind of odd, right? And I think Epic has the I guess temporary luxury of having a hit game on their hands. But if you take that revenue away, it's a very different looking company. I think Unity, there was a lot of belief that somehow this was this key engine to unlocking the metaverse. That was one. But I think the real stumble was just alienating and aggravating all of the love Unity developers had for the company in the last weeks and months. I mean, there was such an uproar, which you knew this was going to happen, because how are you so disconnected from your developers?
Right. And
Right?
understand
I think when you're so disconnected, yeah, but the economics are one thing, but if you just don't have that understanding with your developer and community base who really loved Unity,
right.
Something had to happen. And I think this is like, I guess, the appeasement and hopefully a reset of that company, which I know a lot of developers love and depend on, but they were very, the way it went about and how it all happened. I think it's a good signal for anyone building a platform with an ecosystem. Stay in contact with your developers. Very hard lessons for a lot of people,
Right.
but especially one that had millions of developers that count on it every day, who just thought of it as their bread and butter, and this like disrupted their lives. And I hope they bring someone in who can, hear that message and make it right and still build a successful company.
Yeah, totally agree. And to that point,
In fact, a friend of mine is becoming the interim CEO.
Oh, is he?
I was gonna say a friend of mine is becoming the interim CEO. I don't know if I don't know if it's announced. I'm not going to say who it is, but I do know who's becoming the acting person. So
No,
we'll
I
see what
think
he
it is
does.
announced. I don't know if it's confirmed. It's James Whitehurst, who was the CEO of Red Hat on the
Yep.
Linux side. So
Yes.
we'll see how that culture starts to
Yep.
permeate.
Jim.
The whole Linux has been through their up, down, and
If
sideways.
you're listening, Jim, we're rooting for you.
And a lot of respect to David Elgison, who started this. I remember early on at Meta, coding the first demos of the thing. And it was just so friendly and so easy, that, it just, as Ronnie said, shows how critical it is to stay in touch with developers and really feel them. So yeah, still rooting for Unity. When they announced that they were gonna, be connected with Apple, and their latest launches, I thought this is the next chapter, and they'll succeed. And and I still hope they do.
Yeah, well, and to that end, talking about how to be connected to that community, I think the Unreal folks, while it's tricky times for them, are doing their best to communicate that. And Tim Sweeney, I was at the Unreal conference last week or 2 weeks ago, and Tim Sweeney was very, very overt and very real about talking about the success of his company, X amount of years ago, pre-pandemic, worth doing hundreds of millions of business. Then Fortnite explodes onto the scene. Now they're doing billions in business. And now, to your point, Roni, Fortnite is not, while it's still very successful and a lot of people are playing it, it is not at the height of its success or user engagement. So they're spending more money than they're taking in, and they had to react to that before things got really dire. And so to that end, they're also changing their business model to folks like me and the company I work for, that work in the media entertainment space and the sort of gaming ancillary space, to drive revenue streams, as opposed to just this sort of give it all away and try and make it up on the back end, which is what they do on the gaming interactive side. So there's a lot more to come on that. We'll see.
By the way, Ted, there's a little bit of XR spatial computing trivia for our listeners. But Meron, who is the CEO of Intercosmos, so we're going to talk to him and Darin a little bit, was also the founder and CEO of a rival company to my company, Magic Leap, for a while, and his company is called Meta.
Yes.
And if you think about that, our friend Mark Zuckerberg loved the name so much, he rebranded Facebook to Meta.
Yes.
Which basically was Meron's original company. So just a little
Meron
bit of
gets-
trivia for the listeners, and
Yeah, we're going to dive into that in about, I don't know, 7 or 8 minutes. But Meron gets a huge amount of credit for recognizing where the world was heading and his device. And we'll talk about this in a minute. So let's keep going with the news, and then we'll talk about it. Speaking of devices that you wear in your head, the Meta Quest 3 has been released. You can order them. Some of them are shipping, and they're going to be shipping waves of them. As expected by a lot of us that track this business very closely, 2 things have happened. The reviews on the device are excellent. They keep making more progress from a price performance delivery device that starts at $500. Let's say the average user price is going to spend between $600 and $700 to get the one with more storage and a better strap on it. So well under $1,000. The device does relatively good true color mixed reality, video mixed reality, which we can talk about because you guys were both in the belief that is not the future, and I'm a big believer of that pass through is a more important tool set. But to bring costs down and to make something commercially viable, they're doing what Apple is doing right now, which is video pass through. But the Quest 3 is smaller, more nimble, actually technically, believe it or not, slightly heavier than a Quest 2, but because the stand-up of the device is less in front of your face, the pull-down effect, the perceived weight is less. So wearing it at the conference and doing some development with it, it is very, very comfortable to wear. And I think they're on the right track. I think they learned a lot from their misses on the Quest Pro, took the good things about it, incorporated it into the Quest 3, are selling it at a price point that they believe people can afford. That's all on the positive side. There are lots of reviews on all the tech blogs, TechCrunch, CNET and Engadget, etc., that are commenting very similar to my experience with it and having done a number of mixed reality gaming and entertainment experiences on it. It uses the next gen Qualcomm chipset, which we're going to talk about that news in a minute, which is breaking news. So even a lot of our listeners may not know this because this is just hot off the presses. But better graphics across the board on a Quest 3. And if you look at some of the popular apps like the Golf Plus VR app that had fairly good graphics on a fully mobile device, without tethering it to a computer or any kind of big graphics card, the new Qualcomm chip does a much, much better job on that. The new graphics co-processors are doing a better job on that. So things look better, which is good. And I got firsthand chance to look at all that. So I'm excited for others to check that out. On the potentially sort of overblown again on people believing that the success of virtual reality is going to go mainstream anytime soon. The rumors are, and I don't know if this is much confirmed, I doubt Meta will ever confirm this, not the original Meta, Meron, the current Meta, that I think they were estimating 6-7 million devices being sold this calendar year. I think they're now lowering that, downgrading that to maybe 1.5 to 2 million devices. And we'll have to see how that goes. But I think maybe once the word gets out and people trying it to their friends, these things will sell fairly well. But we're still not talking about mainstream gaming PlayStation.
That doesn't surprise me. I see Facebook Meta as having a inverse problem to what Roni mentioned with Unity. Whereas with Unity, they were very developer focused, then gradually disconnected a bit, and now seeing the challenges there. Quest and that platform actually did a good job of connecting with developers and opening up tool sets really nicely. Their hardware is evolving nicely. I think the challenge that they're facing is a bit of a disconnection from the consumer market and the use cases that could drive adoption, as well as user interface paradigms that I think could scale. Those have always been my mantra at Meta, was this thing has to be zero learning curve or really easy to use, because in order to really harness the power of spatial computing, and that there needs to be sort of a set of killer apps, or at least one that could drive the cost of the platform. That's not been an exception in any successful platform in history. So these are the things that neither Facebook nor Apple, I think, are doing a lot of innovation on right now. And those that really want to win the market, I feel like, need to start doing that. Of course, the developer community is really critical to harness at this point. So I would just look at how they can do both at the same time.
Yeah, good comments. Okay, so our last news story, there's a few others, but I want to get to you guys. The last news story that I think is important to cover is a couple weeks ago at the Meta conference, they also announced their second gen Ray-Ban smart glasses in the partnership with a large Italian company, Luxottica. And the new devices, the second gen devices, are very much second gen. They are better than the first in many ways. But there is competition in the market for those type of devices. And this week's news was that Carrera, for those of you that are old enough to remember the age of the Jerry Bruckheimer, Don Simpson movies, and all the stars wearing these Carrera sunglasses in their Porsches, and the sort of Miami Vice age of sunglasses. Carrera is that company that makes those sunglasses of that style, also Italian company. They are doing a set of smart glasses with very similar features to what the Meta Ray-Ban partnership is, using Amazon Alexa. So that'll be a little bit of a competitive space. Voice recognition using the Alexa system, which of course is fairly robust and a lot of people use it around the world. And we'll see if they are going to be competing head to head on the computer vision, the spatial awareness stuff. But nice to have competition, because as much as Ray-Bans are sort of a staple of the sunglass industry, there are a lot of people that want a different sort of style. So that's what that is. The Ray-Ban announcement was really good and robust at the Meta conference a few weeks ago. I think it was one of the highlights. And we'll see what Carrera comes up with. Also, the Italian sub companies underneath this. There's two Italian very large eyewear companies going at this now. So it'll be very interesting to see. Any comments on that? And then we'll move on.
I think that's, Facebook's ultimate card. If they can really create a warm partnership with Ray-Ban, which it appears they are, then they have at least one part of the big challenge of spatial computing solved. The challenge, not from the perspective of this direction, but from the inverse perspective of somebody kind of looking at it and the social acceptance. I remember pitching to the CEO of Luxottica almost 10 years ago at this point, with Meta, and it's kind of hilarious to see and exciting to see, Meta Ray-Ban, evolving, and so I have a lot of excitement to see where that goes.
There you go. Okay, so
my only thought on all that really quick is I think what we have, this is sometimes overlooked by all the players in XR. We know the form factor, and we actually have two amazing use cases: prescription and sunglasses. So I think what we're waiting for, I think when we'll get billions of people using it, is when the tech fits into this form factor 1-to-1, and you also have your prescription, and you also have your sunglasses, and then you have all the millions of apps. I think as we're moving from like a Magic Leap 2 or Apple Vision Pro or Meta 3, which you measure exactly the weight and form factor distances of each of those to like your Carreras, your regular Ray-Bans. I think as you deviate from that, you lose population, you just lose audience. But I think all of us, especially on this call, can see a day, maybe if you look at the progress of the tech, maybe it's early 2030s, where Ted, you're going to wake up, put on this wireless, it will fix your eyes, you'll see at night, you'll have your sunglasses, you'll have your entire app world. That system, I think, is the one that billions of people will use. And like every time we take a step closer, you gain more audience. And by the way, this is, you and I've had this discussion and not really debate for years, but that's why I think that the move towards video pass-through does not take you there, right? It's like the seawater move. It takes you in a different direction. The one that actually wins billions of people is the one where you just go at a straight line and solve all the problems to make that vision real. And I think that will happen. I think we, both Meron and I know that it'll happen. We've seen technical progress as possible. But hopefully companies will have the will to go all the way there, because the one that unlocks that, it's going to be bigger than Apple computers is today. You unlock that key, it's the biggest key in computing. Maybe next.
And a big kudos to you, Roni, for sort of focusing on form factor early on and really trying to shrink that while maintaining really high quality product. So at Meta, we tried to create the eye contact. That was very important for us. And it's nice to see Apple trying to bring that into video pass-through in this interesting way. So as Roni says, I mean, that's the form factor that it needs to get to. Everyone knows this. So it's about what's the fastest sort of vector there, and how do you stay consistent on that? And we'll see.
Right.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
our last thing, I promised some breaking news, and this to both Meron and Roni's comments on effectively the one step forward, one step back situation of technology. Our friends at Qualcomm, which is a very large company, mostly based out of San Diego, deep Southern California, is laying off over 1,200 jobs, which is, I think, the first time in a very long time that they've been constricting back down. They have over 50,000 employees worldwide, so it's a very large company. So roughly that's a little over 2% of their workforce that they'll be laying off. So most of those, over 1,000, I guess, will be out of their San Diego office, a couple hundred out of the Santa Clara offices and some of the other remote offices. The job cuts effectively will be mid-December, so that's that pre-holiday, unfortunate for them. But Qualcomm's quite a good and big company, so I'm sure their severance packages will be healthy enough to get them through the holidays. But regardless, we have very close ties to Qualcomm. We are connected to them almost daily. They have very close ties to Israel in many, many ways. That's an interesting sort of also telling sign of device adoption, device use case, and where the market of all these different devices are sitting right now. So that's the Qualcomm news. It literally just came out probably early this morning. So we don't have a lot more information on that. But the company, I think, talks about macroeconomic climate, right? So we'll keep a close eye on that. We'll probably talk about that in weeks to come. And lastly, and this will probably dovetail into your world, gentlemen, the AI stuff in all of its forms is now getting a voice, as we would say. So the latest sort of news cycles are many of the big AI players, and I'm going to not talk about this much because I want to get into your world, are starting to use voice bidirectionally, so you can have a voice chat with your AI, which is, of course, causing all kinds of interesting discussions about AI girlfriends and boyfriends and social contracts and things changing. And it may lead us, and feel free to comment on that, Roni or Darin or Meron, into what you guys are doing at Intercosmos. And let's probably get a level set on your company as it stands now. Then let's go back in time a little bit, talk about the original Meta mixed reality device, which was remarkable in many ways. I used it many times in its cycles at various shows and sort of private development work, and had early development units in our worlds for me working in the studio. So if you want to, what we often sometimes do when Charlie and Roni and I get into this is we go to third base before we start at first base. So it's important to maybe just give a little history of the company as it stands now, your background, your legacy, and then we can get into it a little bit, talk about some of the questions.
Absolutely, be happy to. Yeah, so essentially I actually am one of the people that come from that strip of desert you mentioned earlier.
Right.
When I had to do my mandatory service, I was in the special technology unit of the intelligence corps, building gadgets for use cases you can imagine. And then later on went to Columbia and studied computer science and neuroscience, realized the computer was a brain and the brain is a computer. At least this is what my thesis. And that one day they're going to merge. And my career became about trying to predict the market forces and events that would lead to that. And Meta was the first, I imagined a more natural computing experience than us looking into these pixelated screens, trying to, infer sort of social gestures and things. Why not just be sitting holographically in the room together and looking at this brain chip that I'm going to show you in a minute? So that became sort of a vision of natural computing. And I wanted to put it in the brain, and I still do, and I believe it's going there. But 10, 15 years ago, when these original inventions happened, it was like, what's the best possible thing we can do now with the current price performance? And so we tried to bring it as close as possible to the brain. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of, and then Meta was formed, obviously, and I could talk a little bit about that.
What years did Meta start? When did it end up that you ended up having to close up shop? The market wasn't quite ready for it. The technology that you were doing was certainly, between you and Roni, really, pioneering the idea of a pass-through mixed reality device.
It was, right. It was 2012 through 2019.
Interesting. So there's a almost a 7-year run of, and in those days, it must have just been incredibly difficult to find market traction, to find investment, I mean, I'm sure you were just on this constant convincing tour for your life that this is going to be important someday, and the form factor will not always be what it is today. This is a step in the equation, right?
Yeah, well, it certainly was an amazing journey, one that I took a lot of take-home messages and learnings from and applied them on this new company, Intercosmos, that I'd be happy to share a little bit about as well.
Right. So that's the journey now. Now, certainly our listeners like good, salacious stories and anything that makes them smile, and sort of, anything on the entrepreneurial drama front. So is there any insights, anything that you can tell us about the sort of your sort of end of the first real meta journey, and then how the Facebook sort of absconded that name? Was there anything that our listeners might find fun and amusing and maybe even you do now in retrospect? I'm sure at the time it was probably frustrating.
Well, I mean, Ronnie said it earlier. The company was sold to a private equity fund that sold it to Facebook,
Right.
and now the visions that were articulated back then, on stages publicly, sort of that one day somebody was going to wear a Meta Ray-Ban type glass, is now becoming literalized in one of the largest pivots in technological human history. So I'm really excited to see where this is going as I come back home to home base, which for me has always been neuroscience, as I mentioned. And finally, the price performance of technology is such that I believe millions and soon billions of people could actually adopt neurotechnology. And I'm going to ratiocinate that today. And yeah, so the journey then after that happened, I met Dr. Eric Luthart, who was actually Ed Boyden, one of the top 3 neuroscientists in the world out of MIT. I met him. Actually, Sam Altman invited me when I was fundraising for Meta's Series B to Yuri Milner's house for a premiere of a little TV show called that he didn't tell me what it was, and I was like, no, I'm fundraising, man. In retrospect, that's absurd to say no to Sam Altman, but who knew what that would turn into. And then he said, well, Ed Boyden's going to be presenting and keynoting. And I have been a geek fanboy of Ed's work forever. So I said, okay, I'll be right there. I zoomed up to Yuri's house, and it turned out to be the premiere of the TV show Westworld, the HBO show Westworld. And all the actors were there, and it was the most surreal day of my life, one of the top few, and one of the outcomes of it was that Intercosmos, was discussed with Ed Boyden, and Ed connected me later on to Eric Luthart, who is one of the leading neurosurgeons in the country, pioneer of laser neurosurgery and other things. And together we eventually, a few years later, realized that this is ready for the market in the mental health world. And we came together with Susan Alpert, who's the head of the FDA device approvals division. She joined us, and later Dr. Darin Dougherty, who's here on the line from Harvard MGH, who implanted the most number of patients, as far as I know, globally for mental health with devices that are semi-invasive. And we came together and we said, how can we build the absolute best piece of neurotechnology, or colloquially a brain chip, for the largest chronic disease in the world, depression. And that's really the story of Intercosmos.
So that's where your current trajectory is and where you're putting all your efforts. I would be remiss not to give Roni a moment, because it's pretty rare to have 2 titans and pioneers of true pass-through viable mixed reality on to comment on that before we dive into your current state of your efforts, and bring Darin into the conversation and talk about what you're doing. So Roni, last word to you on the mixed reality side before we go into what Meron's passion is right now, and how far he's come with this next piece of the technology world.
Well, one thing, it's very interesting that Meron has moved from mixed reality to deep neurotech. I always thought that the field both he and I were in was a form of neurotech. And it just felt like a logical step forward. And I actually think there'll be relationships between spatial computing and what he builds in the future too. So I think there's something, if you really understand what spatial computing is, and then what he's building now, they're not like separate things. They're probably cousins. So why don't we dive into it?
So now we'll dive in. Okay, so
Absolutely.
to start the process, to give everyone that's listening to this podcast around the world a little level set on some of the basics. How long has the company been in existence? How many people are working on it? What kind of level of fundraising, as much as you can share? Where does the company exist as a business, and what are your aims and goals initially? What are you trying to achieve in fairly base terms, so people can understand what you're working on? You mentioned implantable things, but we kind of glossed over it. We talked about a lot of stuff. So I think it's important to just spend 2 or 3 minutes on giving us the lay of the land. What is your company? How does it exist? What does it do?
Sure. So in very much kind of bullets, our device right now treats the largest mental health disorder, the largest chronic disorder in the world, depression. It is a teeny tiny penny size device that gets slipped under the skin in a 30-minute outpatient procedure. And if a patient is treatment resistant depressed, which means they're the third most severe portion of the depressed world, then they would put it a little bit in the bone, just like a cochlear implant. So they'll shave a little bit of the outer layer of the bone and inset this penny device there. And it works in a way that's analogous to a pacemaker sitting over the heart, sensing arrhythmia, stimulating back into rhythm. It turns out that depression, unlike what we thought, depression and many other mental and cognitive disorders, unlike the previous hypothesis, which was that it was a chemical disorder, recently been debunked. Turns out is what we call a networkopathy, an imbalance of brain networks, electrical disorder. So within depression, I'm going to zoom in, give a sentence, and then you'll see how this device works, and we can move on. There are 2 brain networks that one needs to understand. One of them is a default mode network. Default mode is the network that handles trauma and rumination. So say you get hit by a bicycle, a car, riding a bicycle, and the memory is going to be encoded by this intrinsic internal network that's focusing on your inner world, and that is where memory is encoded, and therefore this trauma. And then the rumination voice, that voice in your head that goes over and over, how I'll never be in that situation again, and that bastard that cut me off in traffic and all that. That's when depression starts to get strong, when that rumination kicks in and the voice in your head just keeps going. And that starts in that default mode network stealing resources from the unsung hero of the brain, the second network, cognitive control network, that we're now using it to focus on each other and be present with the outside world. If the first network is intrinsic, the second network is extrinsic, or processing your outer world. All the good things in our life, we're now using it to focus on each other and learn new things. A meditation session, a good walk on the beach, a discussion with a loved one. That's all the cognitive control network. With patients with depression, they're just one network gets really strong and takes the ability to be present outwardly. So these people are stuck in their head, and that's why it's a very poignant disorder. And Darin will double click on that, having really studied this his whole life. I'll just end by saying that. So go ahead.
I said, let's bring Darin into the conversation, since we've been talking a lot. He's been listening and smiling, and I know wanting to add into this. So the device is real. Is it in clinical trials? Is it, you have one in front of
right here
for the small amount of people that are sitting and watching it on a YouTube channel as opposed to a podcast? So it's a little bit bigger. The one that goes into under the skin around the brain looks like the size of kind of a Panasonic watch battery kind of thing that would go into a lot of devices.
It's
right?
2 stacked pennies. Yeah,
Right.
It's exactly that size, and it sits over the cognitive control network, the network that gets weakened. And like a pacemaker will sense arrhythmia, we're sensing when your baseline goes way down below normal, and then we're stimulating it back into balance. And this device, while the form factor is incredibly novel and tiny and sort of advance is based on 20 plus years of research and stimulation in this exact spot for this exact disorder. So I think unlike other claims in BCI right now, this is really kind of hinging on a lot of well understood science, a science that folks like Darin have been accruing for decades. And I'll pass the mic to Darin to add or modify anything I've said.
Great. This is a fascinating conversation, you guys, and thanks for having me today. So I'm Darin Dougherty. I'm a psychiatrist at Massachusetts General Hospital. I've been there, next year will be 30 years, which is hard to believe. I specialize in mood disorders and anxiety disorders. In addition to my specialty in treating patients with mood disorders, I also direct a division at Mass General. It's the Division of Neurotherapeutics. It's really an embedded neurotech division within the department. And as division chief, I oversee all surgical and/or device-related treatments for psychiatric illness. So that includes some old standbys like ECT or electroconvulsive therapy, which has been around for 100 years. We also have a TMS service, that's transcranial magnetic stimulation. We do vagus nerve stimulation, which is a surgically implantable device to treat depression. We've been involved with deep brain stimulation trials for psychiatric disorders. DBS is now approved by the FDA for OCD. I was a senior author on the failed Medtronic trial for treatment-resistant depression, although that's being revisited. So I've been involved with neurotech. I also was a PI of a DARPA project called Subnets to develop brain-computer interface treatments for disorders vets come home with. So I've done a lot of read and write from the brain, read and write studies, and have a number of patents for neuroalgorithms. So I've been involved.
What's your role at Intercosmos? So you take all that,
and also if you can talk about the successful ECOG trial for depression, I think that'll frame the discussion moving forward, please.
Yeah, I'll try to address both of those. So another thing that we did that I didn't mention is we also did a cortical electrode on the brain surface at the TMS target. It was implanted subdurally, epidurally, so inside the skull, but above the brain surface to deliver electrical stimulation, with a wire connecting the pacemaker on the chest so that we could deliver stimulation, and showed very promising results. And a lot of what Intercosmos is doing is replicating that, but with a much more sophisticated device that doesn't have to go through the skull. And as Meron said, it really is, it's kind of like where the target is. It's really kind of physical therapy for the cognitive control network muscle. It's going to basically push that up. So and then the second question, how I got involved in Intercosmos, they found me, thank goodness. I'm very excited about this approach. But they were aware of the work we had done and our long-standing collaboration in psychiatry with neurosurgery and neurology at Mass General, and our experience in doing device trials, including implantable devices. And so when I heard of this product and got to take a look at it, I was very excited, and I've now accepted a position and working as the chief medical officer for Intercosmos. And I'm really excited about moving forward with this.
So would I be more correct or more incorrect if I use the term transducer, that this is sort of like you talked about much more invasive ways of, once you got a sense of what was really going on in the brain for people that were really suffering from the most severe forms of clinical depression that couldn't be treated by some sort of drug therapy or psychological therapy, Like I'm a fan of all things vagus nerve. Let's take this on a lighter note. I know a little bit about what singing does to, as you can probably see in my background, I have a lot of guitars in my world. I'm sort of a closet singer and guitar player. Roni is also deep into music. Charlie, our other co-host, is deep into music. And just the idea of activating your body brings pleasantry to your life, which is why people that sing tend to be happy or tend to be happier. So, and the idea of, I've seen over the many years that quite invasive situations in terms of trying to solve this when there was no other course of action. So this is something that is wireless easier tolerated, easier implanted, and probably has a pathway to a much larger patient base. Is that correct?
So yeah, that's what I'm really excited about. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm in the trenches treating people with depression, so I want to get them well. But then it's how do we do that? And this, I think, because it's small, it doesn't require going through the skull. It's wireless. It's portable. The patient can take it with them at home, and the prescriptions are done digitally over an iPhone. I think this is truly scalable. We're not going to be doing deep brain stimulation has saved lots of people's lives in psychiatric illness, but in terms of scalability, it's a pretty big deal to have electrodes implanted deep inside your brain.
Sure.
Here we've demonstrated that we can deliver electrical stimulation parameters that should be effective for depression through the skull in animal studies, and also we do have a first in human proof of concept completed. So we're in humans, which is also, I think, pretty impressive for a young company. But we've really demonstrated we can deliver what we need to deliver for therapeutic benefit in the least invasive way with the best form factor.
Really
and I think that ultimately will translate to scalability.
And it sounds like, Meron, you and maybe Roni, you want to talk about this too. It sounds like you're working on taking advantage of this broad term we call IoT, right? That allows things that go into the medical world, which of course require very different compliance and levels of study and provability and safety, but taking advantage of the fact that you're implanting a wireless device very close to someone's brain center that's going to have a very deep, and you can recognize a real effect on this. So it's one of the fascinating things about, the Internet of Things is that this thing gives us all kinds of interesting sort of advantages, right? Which you can track it. And like I know from personal experience, I wore something called a Zeo patch recently because of some heart stuff that I was dealing with, which is effectively an IoT device on my chest that was feeding information back to the doctor via the internet. So it sounds similar to that, right? I imagine there's some capabilities that you can track remotely, Meron?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started kind of showing the form factor, maybe that'll ground the answer. So if this device here, the digital pill, it's about the size of a pill, a little bit thinner, gets embedded under the skin. And then there's a larger quarter-sized device called the psychiatric prescription pod. This, from the comfort and discretion of your home when you're having a coffee in the morning, gets snapped magnetically over the hair. And what that does is it pulls the data from the implant, sending it to the psychiatrist so both you and the psychiatrist can see your depression graph, your mood graph, which is in and of itself quite novel. There have not been accurate enough biomarkers in our space to date. So that's one thing that I think can really help patients. And then the psychiatrist can modify the prescription, can sort of pick on their side from a set of FDA approved prescriptions, send them back to your pod. The prescription will have safety bounds, how many times you can use it, at what intensity and frequency, etc. And therefore, I think it can ultimately be safer than pharma. And the prescription pod will then send it to the implant, and then you're done after 20 minutes of that a day. You have your little sort of AirPod-like case that you'll have 2 of these, so you can go out to the desert for a couple of days and just and have your therapy. Analogous therapies, transcranial magnetic stimulation, has a whopping 80% efficacy, which in a medical device is almost science fiction. That's like, in comparison, it's about 400% more efficacious than drugs for treatment-resistant depression. And I think actually, before we go any deeper into the product, it is worth talking about the person that we're trying to help and kind of like who these folks are and what their life is like. So it's because that's ultimately what's going to dictate the success of this kind of a product, presuming the science that Darin has been doing for decades is on point, and it really is about the market. So to understand that, there's about 260 million folks with depression before COVID. That about doubled. So it was the largest chronic disorder in the world before COVID, and then it doubled. And then out of that, a third of the patients don't react to 2 courses of antidepressants. They're what we call treatment resistant. So there's over 100 million of them. And in the US, 5.7 million people. And some of these folks are in the darkness for decades. And it is really calcified, severe depression where you're stuck in your head, unable to feel and process emotions and outward stimuli quite as effectively. And it's what the World Health Organization considers the most debilitating disorder in the world. You can be a cancer patient, even a terminal cancer patient with a positive outlook on life. By definition, you cannot do that with treatment-resistant depression. So that's why WHO considers this the most debilitating disorder. And for these folks, there's really no solution. Drugs don't work. There's TMS, this refrigerator-sized device. There's another refrigerator-sized device called electric shock. Electric shock therapy from 100 years ago induces a seizure in your whole prefrontal cortex. It's by metaphor like pressing the force reset button on your computer, force resetting your networks into balance, but it comes with a host of side effects, amnesia, personality changes that are long lasting, and just the ick factor of plugging yourself into the wall, 5 days in a row in a hospital is enough to make this only used by out of the 5.7 million folks, only about 125,000 people a year. So just a couple percent. And then that's 100-year-old technology. 30 years ago, TMS was created to be a little bit more friendly. And it's magnetically pulsing to the exact spot we're stimulating. And it doesn't have really the side effects of electric shock therapy. And it has almost double the efficacy. Electric shock is about 50%, which is a lot for treatment resistant. TMS is now showing 80% efficacy. And there's a challenge. Only 60,000 people are using TMS. You may ask why, if it's less side effects and more efficacy. The answer is because of a compliance issue, big problem. You have to go to the doctor 20 days in a row to get TMS's efficacy.
So that immediately starts a downward spiral that most people can't get through it. Yeah.
Even healthy, adults imagine going 20 days in a row to the doctor without missing one appointment. Imagine these folks are the least motivated patient population on the planet. Getting out of bed in the morning is difficult for them, which really killed the TMS industry. And so what we have done is we said, okay, TMS works. It's stimulating in the right way. We know the stimulation parameters that work. The only challenge is, compliance and access. So why don't we miniaturize this thing to the size of a penny? Make it really minimally invasive, 30 minutes to embed. And then you have a TMS in your head for the rest of your life. Your depression is managed kind of on your iPhone. And we think that is going to completely revolutionize the way that these patients live, and really we're here to help them. And
it's great. It's incredibly admirable. These things take, really difficult roads, years and years to develop. It sounds like you're making really good progress. We're kind of coming up on our sort of wrapping it up, but there's clearly lots more to discover here. Roni, do you have any final thoughts or things you want to add into the last few questions here? And then we'll have them give information to people that maybe, or have, relatives or loved ones that are suffering from this, that they want to get more information. You can.
Just a quick thought. I think, in the brain-computer interface space, I've got a lot of background in it. Before I started Mako Surgical, we were looking at robotics to implant deep brain stimulation with groups like Cleveland Clinic and Vanderbilt. So I think there's a couple of camps. There's the really serious camps, like I believe what Intercosmos is doing, Precision Neuro. There's some of the Elon Musk stuff, which might be a mix of like pop culture plus maybe some real work going on. It's hard to discern. But if you look at just the serious work, there's the deep invasive stuff, like you're putting meshes on the brain, electrodes deep into the brain. What I think is really amazing about Intercosmos is they're not having to do that deep surgery, right? It's, I think like spatial computing, just accessing the brain through the retina is one portal. And I think what Intercosmos is doing is introducing a new portal that's very small, incredibly minimally invasive, that allows for precision targeting. I think there's something very profound about that, where right now we try to deal with, I would call it the malware in the human brain, right? That causes anxiety, depression, violence, psychotic behavior, all these things. We basically bombard the system with chemicals that have huge side effects all over the body, and they don't always work, right? It's like the part of the issues we have in the world are like the psychosis and issues of the human mind we've not been able to come to grips with. Now, there's a weird and interesting world we're coming to, and I think Intercosmos is creating that, which Ted, we could talk about in future broadcasts. This idea of like reprogramming portions of the brain, this precision targeting in the brain has immense benefit, but it also has this dark side to it if it gets into the wrong hands. So I feel like, but the same thing with like any kind of drug, where you could do amazing things to help people and it could be abused. But I think Intercosmos opening up a door that could change the pathway of how we treat neurologic disease. I mean, that to me super exciting. And just I don't know if I have a question, but it's just more of a thought for our viewers and
Yeah.
listeners.
And as we wrap up, Darin and Meron, if you want to give us some sort of final thoughts and where to learn more, if you're either suffering yourself or know someone that's suffering from this and would like to dive into this more, I think it's quite admirable.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks very much for hosting us. Darin, you're meeting these kinds of patients every day. If you can just add anything at all, and then I'll just speak of the status of the company and we'll wrap. Go ahead.
Yeah, finish there. Yeah, I think I really want to emphasize to the audience, some already know because all of us have friends or family members who suffer from depression, but just the degree of debilitation with this illness. So oftentimes people are unable to work, or if they do work, they're not functioning at the level they would before. It affects the relationships with their families, friends, people that they love. They'll often socially isolate. They're amotivational, so don't want to get out of the house, don't want to do things, and their world just gets smaller and smaller. And it's an excruciating illness. I love working with this population because it's so gratifying when you get them well. And one of the things I'm excited about with this device is, again, something we have a very strong sense is going to be highly efficacious, that can be used in a lot of people who otherwise don't have access to care. I mean, we haven't talked about it, but think about third world countries. They have power. This is something that we could use to help through NGOs and the like in other countries as well. So I'm just very excited about it, and just really want to highlight just how devastating this illness is and how excited I am to be involved in something that may help this population. And with that, I want to hand it off to Meron so we can provide a little bit more information about the company for the listeners. And thank you again for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Darin. Your work at Harvard inspired us early on, and very grateful you're on with us. So actually, this is a good place to wrap, because I mentioned this comment earlier about the spatial computing industry still struggling to find that killer app, that use case that is painful enough to drive a new platform's adoption and pay for the actual cost of the device, that one use case. And this is really the culmination, as Darin explained, of 5-6 years of deep thought around what is that use case for the next platform for brain computer interfaces. And we feel that the trade-off makes a lot of sense for a patient in that darkness to get a little bit of bone shaved out, less, again, invasive than a cochlear implant, about the same amount of bone extracted as a nose job. So we think to change your life that profoundly from going from the darkness into the light, we believe this can actually pay for this platform. And then it is a platform, as Roni mentioned, the various disorders like OCD, PTSD, anxiety are now coming out to be networkopathies, imbalances of brain networks that TMS is actually showing great efficacy for. So our device, being TMS to go, can then scale to those other disorders. And it's really beautiful to think of a world where people can get out of that without side effects. And that's what we're fully committed to doing. So you kind of asked where we are on our journey. We raised $10.6 million last year. We're about 15 folks, about a third of us are doctors. And now we're going into our next round of financing. And as we started a clinical trial in humans. One of the things that really separates, I think, BCI companies that are really serious is that they're in humans already, and there are a number of them out there, like as Ronnie mentioned, Precision embedded a few patients, and Synchron embedded a few patients, and others. And so we're proud to be one of those that are actually helping patients today at WashU and Harvard MGH. These two institutions are now actively either recruiting patients or embedding patients, and we have 12 months of human data coming out, and it's looking really promising. I'll leave it at that for now. So that's pretty much where we're at. We're really grateful to be able to help with this really big use case that humanity, I think, needs, especially now after COVID, especially in weeks like this week, to reflect on how we can make people really give people balance, peace, and harmony.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Great.
that's chapter 2.
It's good, and it's a good spot to take a moment to pause and reflect. And thank you both for joining us. Roni, thanks for your time today. Charlie, we'll see you back next week. And I think, you know, what you guys are doing with your company, and clearly it's a small and pure entrepreneurial startup. You've raised a relatively modest amount of capital. You have a very small focused team working on solving a problem. And I think nothing kind of embodies the Israeli spirit, since you come from that region yourself, than what you're doing, trying to really solve a problem that's really needed in the world. You know, this isn't fluff. This is serious stuff that you're using all of that technology base that you've learned from your journey, and probably others in your company's journey, to accomplish something really important. And I think that's a very, very good, positive way to close this week's session of This Week in XR. For all the listeners out there, I imagine you can just search for Intercosmos. You'll find more information on the web. If you have patients or relatives that would like to learn more about the clinical trials and how to get involved, I imagine there's ways to learn about that too. So we'll post show notes up, and feel free, by the way, for Darin and Meron, share this with your network as well. If this kind of in-depth discussion is something you don't get that often, and would like to, you know, put it out to different places other than our listeners, which tend to be sort of tech, gaming, entertainment, you know, sort of all that stuff. This is a very positive and important part of our journey together in XR, and we appreciate the time and energy. So that's this very special Friday the 13th episode of This Week in XR, and very, very unprecedented time. So thank you all for joining, and we'll see everybody next week for yet
Thank you
another
so much,
episode.
Ted, and it's great to see you, Roni. You're right. Spatial computing is a form of neurotechnology, and it's nice to see this tight group of people converging on that, and I'm grateful, everyone. If anyone has any folks that want access to our clinical trials, you'll find them on our social, you'll find them on our website. And my heart goes out to all the folks in Israel that need it. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining, and we'll see you next week.